Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast, with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks, what's next in a world without God? If you're enjoying the show so far, make sure to like and subscribe, rate and review, and consider supporting us on Patreon.
Hey, welcome to Beyond Atheist. Beyond Atheist, Jesus Christ. We're vibing. All right. Hello and welcome to Beyond Atheism. And today we're switching up a little bit. We don't have a guest, but don't be afraid because it turns out that we actually know things. Sometimes we have answers to our own questions, which is surprising. And with me today, as always, is Nathan Alexander. Nathan, you're a historian, right?
Yeah,
you know a lot about history. And you're also Canadian.
Yes.
And you know a lot about Canadian history.
I guess so, yeah. Well, yes.
So let's spend some time today going over generally like Canadian history. And then let's poke on one particular part of how God snuck into Canadian history. Because you just wrote or just published an article about God showing up in the Constitution. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the article. It's on Only Sky. It's called "How God Was Wedged into Secular Canada's Constitution."
So you have a secular constitution that includes. Is it allusions to God? What does it say?
It's in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is sort of, well, I guess it's what the name says. This was created in 1982. The reference to God is in the preamble, and it says the preamble just it says, whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. So I was definitely kind of surprised to learn that there was this recognition of the supremacy of God, because I hadn't known that. I just happened to find this out earlier this year, and I don't know if really many people know about it. So I wanted to write the article, just, and the article's about like how that happened. How did it be? And just, I think it's interesting because this is not in the 19th century or something, when it was added. It was 1982. Like
modern times.
That's
Most people were alive then.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's.
Yeah. So.
But it's still, Canada is still considered a secular country.
Yeah, I think in general, Canada's very secular, despite this reference to God in the Constitution.
So before we get to how that got in there, let's get some background on Canada. Figure out where we are here. Because this is what most people know, the history of Canada.
Okay, all right.
Go back a little bit, like 20,000 years, you have a land bridge. That's when people first start coming over.
All right.
Right? So this is a very general history. So people start moving into Canada then, a few thousand years later, Leif Erikson shows up. It's colder than he thought. He goes home. French show up. Right. The British show up. They have a big snowball fight on the Plains of Abraham, is my understanding of it. And France agrees, yeah, you guys can have it. And then Canada's a country, right? And then it's all Dudley Do-Right and Don Cherry after that. And then Celine Dion conquers the world, and there we go. That's right. Canada.
I think that's a pretty good summary.
So when does Canada start?
Canada becomes an independent country in 1867.
That's after the U.S. Civil War. Well, that's pretty. When? Whoa! So what were they before then?
So Canada was a British colony, basically. Yeah, like you said, there was a part that was settled by France, but then later the British, took control of that, and so there's a large French-speaking population in Canada from that legacy. But nonetheless, it was all controlled by Britain. But mostly, it was the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, and then the eastern provinces. The West really hadn't been settled yet by sort of European settlers, anyway.
And when was it
And so
finally? When was like that Canadian project finally completed? The westward expansion.
it was by the end of the 19th century, all the provinces were that are now part of Canada were part, except for Newfoundland, which didn't become a province. It remained like a British, not sure what the term is, British dependency or something like that, until I think it was 1949, and it joined Canada. They had a referendum to join. But yeah, like after Canada became a country in 1867, pretty soon after, in the decades following that, the Western provinces, as European settlers were encouraged to settle there, they then joined Canada.
So before then, as a colony, it's doing it under, was it direct rule from the UK?
No, they're in the early 19th century. Canada started to get more and more kind of more of a say, basically.
So in 1867, then this changes and Canada becomes its own country. Does it? Do you guys have a founding document like a constitution?
Yeah, so the Constitution, which founded Canada, is called the British North America Act. Well, because like that was what Canada used to be called. I guess like it was referred to as British North America. Um, so yeah, basically that created Canada, and that was what was set out like an early constitution. We still didn't have full control of like our foreign affairs until the 1930s. So, for example, in the World War One, so when Britain joined the war, then Canada was automatically joined as well. So it wasn't until after like the 1930s when we gained control of our foreign affairs.
So, all right, Nathan, in 1867, you have a founding document. Does it explicitly mention God in this, or is it more of a secular document?
No, it's interesting because it doesn't mention God in the document. I mean, there's some quirks to it. So the education system that's set out is there's some weird things like because the French speaking area of Quebec was mostly Catholic, whereas the other parts were Protestant. There were some guarantees in the Constitution about ensuring that the Protestant minority in Quebec and then the Catholic minority in Ontario would get education in their own sort of denomination or sect or whatever. So that's when we can talk about it later, but that's one thing. Like in Ontario, you still have publicly funded Catholic schools and no other kinds of like publicly funded religious schools.
But
Yeah,
actually, that's interesting in itself because in the Protestant areas, the government paid for Catholic education, and
right.
in the Catholic areas, the government paid for Protestant education.
Well, I mean, probably at this time, like state-funded education probably wasn't super advanced. I mean, in
Yeah, it
terms
may
of
not have
like,
existed.
it's not the education system we have now, obviously. So I think like the state funding was probably minimal, but there was a sort of constitutional guarantee that was to get both sides or like the French and English sides to sign on that there needed to be this guarantee that there would always be support for the minority religions.
So it's
Um,
meant more as an sort of equalitarian measure, a pluralistic measure, where we're going to protect minority beliefs. We're
yeah,
not going to allow states to use their power to destroy one particular set of ideas
yeah,
rather than, but it doesn't actually, it doesn't endorse a religion. It's not establishing a religion. It's just helping minority religions, particular minority religions.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
So that's
hmm
1867. What, and you continue on with this without any documents any foundational documents that establish a religion or connect Canada to religion. Actually, did this constitution come with a Bill of Rights, or had it been, was it amended after that time?
I think, I mean, I think like in Britain, I think it was just sort of probably this precedent of like the British Constitution, which is unwritten, I guess, but which is made up of all sorts of court decisions going back centuries or whatever.
Yeah.
So no, there was no explicit document kind of laying out rights, and so this was kind of a perpetual issue. And Canada first tries to do something about this in 1960 with a Bill of Rights
So this is
that was
almost a
passed.
hundred years later. You're getting around to the Bill of
Yes,
Rights.
yeah. um, so that's interesting because the Bill of Rights that does have a mention of God, unlike the British North America Act. And in the preamble to the Bill of Rights, it says, it affirms that the Canadian nation is founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God.
And this
Um,
is in 1960.
1960, yeah.
Wow. What's included in these rights?
It's a pretty standard document of rights. So it's, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equality, things like right to counsel, and so on.
I love the idea that it's just a standard sort of boilerplate Bill of Rights. Like Canada just went down to the library, found what there was, and started making photocopies.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, I guess there was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is passed after the Second World War. I'm sure like things like this were kind of drawn upon to find stuff to include, but ultimately the Bill of Rights, it was widely seen as like ineffective and like basically a failure because it didn't amend the Constitution, and it was like basically is it just a piece of legislation or is it some sort of fundamental document? Yeah.
So it
So
was seen as
yeah,
being too weak to actually implement something like that.
it was just seen as ineffective, and so this is why there was a need for a more established, we'll say, like constitutionally recognized document, and that would be the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
But before the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, what did do we know what both religious freedom and establishment look like in Canada? Because we're not talking about Canada's not establishing a religion in any of these instances, right? In 1867 or
No, right,
1960.
right.
So they're not establishing one. And this one allows freedom of religion. So that's basically meaning like non interference, right? That's where we're at.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
And are there between 1960 and 1982, are there is religious interference a problem in Canada?
I don't think so. And I mean, freedom of religion was pretty well established, I think, even before the charter. And I think the interesting thing, or one interesting thing, is that in the 60s, so Pierre Trudeau, who was the one who helped push through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and also Justin Trudeau's father. Um,
Good thing we got rid
yes,
of monarchy, huh?
right, exactly. Um, in the 60s, before Pierre Trudeau became prime minister, he was the Minister of Justice. And in this role, he helped to introduce legislation that would remove a lot of like religiously inspired or like things like criminalizing abortion and homosexuality and contraception. Basically, he helped to push through this legislation that decriminalized all these things. And there's a famous quote from him, from Pierre Trudeau, saying, "There's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation." And I mean, so obviously, like Canada is becoming secular in the sense of like, these religiously inspired laws for criminalizing abortion or whatever are being decriminalized. Yeah, paradoxically, I guess at the time of this, like the passage of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Canada was already a fairly secular place, I would
Mm-hmm.
say.
But it sounds like it's also addressing this worry that you could have religious authorities imposing these sorts of things, or that you could have the government could start to reflect religious ideology, not secular ideology.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a general. I mean, it's good to codify freedom of religion and freedom. from religion, I guess.
So he's
Um,
motivated by these sort of liberal concerns that we need more individual freedom
yeah,
and
yeah,
uh, to get away from these sort of religious prescriptions.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, he was a member of the Liberal Party, and yeah, focused on individual rights. He himself was Catholic, but nonetheless was not in favor in any way of like religious interference in government.
Right. So it's
Um,
he's kind of building this. It sounds like it's kind of like a secular firewall. And it goes
yeah,
back to
I
like
think
those
yeah,
differences. It's like there's that change. We talked about different forms of secularism before, and one is like, well, you can have like minority supports and you can maintain pluralism, and the state can sort of be this balancing act, or you can have more the American style where it's a firewall, right? Like this is state and this is church. And it sounds
yeah,
like he's
yeah,
trying to create more of this division between church and state. Is
yeah.
that
I
a good
think that's
interpretation? Is that a good
probably
understanding of it?
fair. Yeah, I mean, I don't think, like I don't think the motivation for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms itself was solely like a secular motivation. Well, the reason for doing it was like even though Canada was independent and everything, there was still our constitution was still kind of like British in origin. I mean, it was still based on the British North America Act. And Canada wasn't able to amend our own constitution. Um,
Oh, really?
because I think or I mean, like I think they needed like the British Parliament to agree, and so and so on. So basically, it took decades really to like agree upon something. Like I think numerous governments tried and failed to get it because like all the provinces need to agree, or well, or I mean, or to like to agree to some extent. So it's tough to kind of get that agreement. Yeah, so it was called like patriot or repatriating the Constitution, like bringing the Constitution back to Canada. Um, so that was and to also create a document that went beyond the Bill of Rights, which was ineffective. So yeah,
Yeah. But it's weird. So okay, so it's a liberal document, it's a legal document, it's something about procedure, right? Like how do we do this stuff? About building an effective Canadian system, institutions. How does God show up into it? This is because this is a weird thing, right? Like if none of this has anything to do with God, it's not really a contributing factor. It's based on old school liberalism, individual rights, freedoms, freedom of mind, freedom of religion with no state establishment. How does God find its way into this document?
yeah. So I guess when they started writing it, there were a couple different early drafts, and one of them had in the preamble there was something about saying Canadians shall always be, with the help of God, a free and self-governing people. Then like this revision or this draft at some point it was all struck, that language. I think the interesting thing is like the context, that there was kind of a growing evangelical movement at the time, in the same way in the US, not to the same extent or the same kind of strength, but there was still kind of a vocal group of evangelicals. And so basically the conservatives tried to put God, well, they copied the language from the Bill of Rights preamble and put that in. The liberals took it out again, but then the evangelicals really like went on this big campaign to encouraging people to write to the members of parliament and stuff, like saying like we really want this uh, this God reference in the charter. And so yeah, there was this big campaign. And even within Trudeau's own Liberal Party, there were some people who were sympathetic to the evangelicals, or were saying like, look, like this is a growing voting bloc. We shouldn't agitate them. We should just, maybe we should just go with this concession, and then like maybe we'll avoid like electoral disappointments in the future by not like alienating them. So ultimately, they decide like, okay, we'll just sort of stick this language in, and yeah, not try to piss them off. But
They're
there's a
just
funny,
they're just
yeah,
tossing them a bone. That's it.
Exactly. Yeah. The funny thing is, like Pierre Trudeau, he agreed to it, but he said like, I don't think God gives a damn whether he's in the Constitution or not. um,
Good
so
response.
yeah, I mean, I think it's like that's quite funny. I mean, it was such a hassle trying to to get this chart like the Constitution through because this is like really the least of their worries, like this preamble. And so I think the thinking was probably like it's not worth the fight, and it's better to just give it. And I think it's because like maybe they thought no one will really care that much. I think that's basically been true. I mean, there was I talk about in the article there was one member of parliament named Sven Robinson. He was with the party called the NDP, which is the New Democratic Party, which is sort of the more left wing party in Canada. And he opposed the inclusion of this language in the as they were doing the drafts, but to no avail. And he later on presented like a petition to get it removed. But then again, like it just no one wanted to take that up.
Right. Even though it had been
Um,
struck down the first time. Originally they struck it.
yeah, originally, like in an early draft, they just removed that language. I'm not sure exactly why. I think it could be. It may not have been anything to do with God. It may have just been. I mean, just because the preambles, it's ultimately symbolic, and I think they might have just said like, let's focus on the main part first, and then we can, the meat of the Constitution. Then we can write the preamble later. Um, so I think that was maybe part of the thinking.
And does this ever get cited for like proof that Canada's a religious country? Because in the US, we're the opposite, right? We have our documents make no mention of God or Jesus, any of that stuff. There's absolutely no connection between, the Bible and or Christian Bible or Christianity or Christian theology or any of this stuff in any foundational text. There's no connection between a religion and the creation of our country, but people constantly harp on it as like, well, yeah, it's a religious document. It shows that it's based on Christianity. It's a Judeo-Christian. Do people ever point this out? Be like, no, Canada is a Christian country. Canada is a religious country because we recognize God. And we know we recognize God because it's in the Bill of Rights. Does that ever come up?
Yeah, the Charter of Rights.
Charter of Rights. I'm
But
sorry.
yeah,
You
no, it's
use
okay.
funny
It's
names for things.
yeah, um, it's funny because the way I first found out about this was I was happening to be looking in this Facebook group of like kind of like one of these anti-vaccine skeptic
Oh yeah.
groups or whatever, and basically they were saying that vaccine mandates and so on are unconstitutional. And someone made a comment like, this is against our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms recognizes the supremacy of God and blah, blah, blah. And I saw that. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like, how stupid are these people? And then I go and look at the charter and I see the preamble. It's like, oh yeah, okay. I guess I guess they have a point.
Right.
But I
Somebody
think,
found it.
yeah, I think some like kind of fringe Christian parties do, like political parties do mention this fact. But like in the legal sense, apparently it has no standing. I mean, like there's no kind of way it can be applied in the law. I think there was one court decision. I'm not sure when it was, in the 90s maybe. Basically, which the court, I think it was a provincial court that said like this phrase is like a dead letter. And I think people tried to argue in courts in like the court various times, like in regard to certain like religious practices or whatever, and then they would cite this part of the charter, like the preamble, as some kind of justification for whatever thing where their own like religious freedom would go beyond the law, would permit them to do something that the law wouldn't allow. But
Right.
then like the
Because
courts,
the law has to be submissive to God. God is
yes, right,
supreme.
exactly, yeah. But then basically the courts always reject this reasoning. So that's encouraging. That
Yeah,
like
yeah. For
even
now.
though yes, even though there is this preamble, nonetheless, it doesn't really have any legal force. So
But
I
I mean,
think,
but
yeah,
is that what was? Man, I want to jump into like the guesswork and the speculation. I'm trying to resist it.
what do you mean?
Like, is was this kind of the point, right? That when you get things like this, like it's your foot in the door, isn't it? If you're a
Mm,
religion, it gets your foot in the door, right? Where you can
yeah, I mean,
you
I
can
think
say
that's
this stuff.
yeah, I think that's probably that may be the motive of the like the people who really wanted to get it in the charter. I mean, obviously they see it as more than just symbolic, I imagine.
Do you know like what if they had any other issues with the inclusion of the Bill of Rights, or I'm sorry, the Charter? I'm never gonna get it right.
Um,
The Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Were there like right wing or religious reactions to it that were against it? That said, we're not gonna accept it unless you do this.
I'm not sure, but just one thing is like one of the people behind the charter, who's Jean Chrétien, he was later a prime minister, but he was just minister of justice at the time. Basically, he said that when they were doing the consultations and everything for the charter, like they got the most mail about that the issue of the God language in the preamble. So I think that like for the evangelicals, that was probably their biggest issue. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, there was a whole host of like issues about the charter. I mean, one thing, maybe it's too much of a tangent, but basically like there's this part of the charter called the notwithstanding clause, which basically allows any province to just say like we're not going to accept the charter, we're just going to go beyond it, like, or whatever, like we're just going to violate it. And like they can just do that.
That was a
um
clause in it where they could just ignore it.
yeah, they need to, like, it's like they invoke this notwithstanding clause and then they can just go ahead and do whatever thing they want to do. um this was to get the provinces to agree. I mean, like, and I don't know, it's yeah, too much of a tangent, but like Quebec never signed on to the constitution. um they basically like there was this like backroom deal where the Quebec the provincial leader was not there, and like basically the all other provincial leaders like came up with the agreement without the Quebec leader there,
Wow.
and pretty much forced it through. And so I think for a time after the new constitution was enforced, like every every piece of legislation the Quebec government passed, they invoked the notwithstanding clause, just like to just like to sort of thumb their nose at the government or whatever.
Hmm. Of course, it sounds like a
So
very Quebec thing to do.
yeah, so I think like there was a ton of constitutional difficulties or whatever.
Mm. So they needed to bring more people in.
Yeah,
And
that
so
was
how many
yeah.
people are we talking in 1982? What do we have figures on how big the sort of religious right was in 1982?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, I think the thing is like, even if it wasn't numerically big, just like today in the U.S., I mean, they're not a huge demographic, but they're so politically mobilized that they can have like undue influence. And I think it was maybe a similar case in the early '80s in Canada, that like these were the people were so mobilized, to write their members of parliament and so on. Yeah, so it's like I really don't know the exact numbers, but I imagine it was not a huge number, I'm sure. But if you're getting, you know, who knows how many letters from this this group, then yeah, they could seem more influential maybe than they actually were.
Yeah,
So
I mean, we definitely see that in the US too, where they're motivated and organized. So even though, I mean, like we've talked about this many times before, like you look at evangelical Christians in the US and you compare it to the religiously unaffiliated in the US, the numbers are about the same.
Yeah.
But then you
Yeah.
look
Exactly.
at the political representation, and it's completely different. It's you have really high evangelical or religious identifying, and almost non-existent non-religious
Yes.
identifying.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, so in some ways, this is just it's a political. It's almost like a symbol. It's a signifier with nothing really signified, although people read into it. What else can we say about it? Is this? I mean, it's kind of like a token. Are these the right words to use for something like this, or do you see it as something
Yeah.
more? Does it have a greater meaning?
I think like ultimately it is symbolic. I mean, there's other things we can talk about too, like the national anthem, which also contains a reference to God.
Mm. Which was
Um,
recently changed. So you recently, what's
yeah.
the reference to God? What was it in the old version, and how was it changed in the new version?
Yeah. Well, the reference to God wasn't changed, but
That's
there
why
was a,
not. What's going on up there?
yeah, there was, well, in the English version anyway, there was the verse called, it said, I think in all thy sons command. I should look that up.
Nathan, I don't want to admit this, but I know
Uh,
exactly what it was. Yeah, it's all thy son's command.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's in all thy sons command. And then they changed it to in all of us command to get a more gender neutral version. But but it also there's also a reference to God, and there's a verse that says, "God keep our land
Yeah,
glorious and
or
free."
yeah,
Mhm.
and
And yeah,
that was kept.
yeah, yeah. I'm not even sure if that really came up. It was just a separate issue, I think. Like
Yeah, was
yeah.
there much discussion over it?
I really don't know. I mean, I think there was basically there was one guy and one member of parliament who would continually introduce legislation to or whatever to to try and change that the reference to the in all thy sons command. So I don't know if like if there was ever any other debate about the reference to God. So on that article I posted on Only Sky, someone mentioned in the comments about the French version of the national anthem is even more difficult because there's references to something like carrying the cross, and like there's something like your valor steeped in faith. And so like it's I mean in can obviously it's like you need to make the change in English and French too. So
Yeah.
uh so
So it's not
yeah.
just the French version isn't just a translation, it's a different song.
Yeah, the lyrics are different. I'm not sure exactly like how different the lyrics are, but obviously
It
there
sounds
are
pretty
sort
different
of
if you're carrying a
substantial
cross with
differences.
valor steeped in
Yeah,
faith.
yeah. so I mean, like it would be relatively easy to make the change for the English because someone said like you could just change it to "We'll keep our land glorious and free"
Yeah,
rather than
because God
but
ain't doing shit.
yeah, that's right. Whereas I don't know, like in the French, it would be much more challenging because, you've got to change the lines, but then also make words that will rhyme and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I
But I
yeah,
think there's a thing like, does this matter that much? And I think on the one hand, maybe it doesn't, but then on the other hand, it's like the preamble to the or to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and our national anthem. I mean, obviously, these are what we aspire to as a nation. Like these are like our highest ideals and so on. I think it's definitely contradictory or whatever to our current secular values, and like the fact that more and more Canadians are becoming non-religious and religious is declining in importance. It just becomes increasingly it clashes with with that value.
yeah,
I think their values. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and I mean there's definitely these two ways to think about it because it's on the one hand it's a very secular document that does secular things and enshrines a form of secularism, right? Like it's protecting individual rights, presumably at some point from religious intrusion, which is a good thing, and we should be very happy to have that. And we and if that cost you this symbol, having God in the language, it's probably much better to have a secular document that has some religious language rather than a religious document that has secular language. For atheists, right? Like I guess this is the reason we don't get all bent out of shape about "In God We Trust" in our money down here,
Right, right,
is that like it's money. It's a very secular thing. It's like the least religious thing that we have, and it has a mention of God on it. So what? It's money. It's like it's the antithesis of Christianity. So it's better to have a secular thing that has this religious symbol than to have a religious thing that looks and sounds a little secular, right?
right. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
But it is friggin' annoying that
Yeah,
there is a cost to it, right? And people can cite it and people can believe it and it can change your worldview, right? Of what these documents are.
yeah, and I think, yeah, it's annoying. I mean, like, uh, I wish it were different because, and I think like, I mean, I guess another thing could just is that it's also like not true that our rights are God given or
Right?
whatever.
Or yeah, that God is not supreme. God's not supreme
Right.
over the
Yes.
laws
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Canada.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
We're
Yeah.
not always running it by him. Is this okay?
Hmm.
Is it all right if we
Yeah.
prosecute for
Yes.
theft?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, there's another issue, which was just recently in the news, was that, and another thing I didn't know was that in Parliament, in the Canada's Parliament, each time there's a sitting, like at the start of the day, there's a prayer that's read, and it's a similar, like it says, Almighty God, we give thanks for the great blessings which have been bestowed on Canada, blah blah blah, Amen. And basically, just this past week, there was a motion to get rid of it, but not like the Liberals and the Conservatives didn't support that. They voted to keep it.
So it came up. So all right, wait. A couple things about this. It's not like we've seen with like some city councils in the U.S. where it's rotating, right? Where you allow a certain group
Right.
to come in. It's always one set prayer. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
It's yeah. Exactly. It's one prayer.
And who does it?
Um, this I think it's the Speaker of the House who is also a member of Parliament.
So it's
But
not a chat. It's not like an official chaplain.
no, they're also a member of Parliament, but someone votes them to be like the Speaker, and basically they just sort of act as the mediator or moderator for the debate. And I think they read the prayer. Yeah. So basically, yeah. It's not like a rotating prayer or something like that. It's the same one every time. And basically, the party who introduced it was the Bloc Québécois, who are this like the sort of want Quebec to be an independent country. Like they were the ones who introduced it, and then they said like they would want to replace it with like a reflection thing or whatever.
We just had a Supreme Court case in the U.S. that said that Boston, the city of Boston, has to allow religions or like churches if they want to. So they can't be rejected. They can't be denied flying a flag. Flying. Oh my God! Give me a minute. It's a little convoluted.
Uh huh.
So Boston City Hall has three flagpoles, and one of them is mostly ceremonial. And they allow other groups to fly flags on it. So during Pride, you can hang a Pride flag. And
Right.
what
Okay.
they did is they turned down a Methodist group from flying the Christian flag because they're like, we're not going to establish a religion. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you just made this rule up. You've got to allow, if you're going to allow it for this group, you got to allow it for that group. You can't discriminate based on religion. So as soon as that ruling came down, the Satanic Temple immediately applied to put up a flag on the at the Boston City Hall. So there we go. We got that.
And so like they have to allow them to do it, or
That's yeah, for now anyway. But Boston can make a rule. So this is one of the things that happens. They are allowed to make a rule that says we will not when we won't use it for religious purposes because that would be seen as establishment. But you have to make that as a law. But yeah, one of the things I see with this is that these symbolic acts do matter because they're a form of power. They're this soft power.
Yeah, that's a
And
good point.
if you drive by your town hall and they're flying a Christian flag or a Vatican flag, right? Or some religious flag, that communicates something to you. It shows that they have enough power to get the town to do something for them. And
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
that has an impact on all of us, right? And this is one of the real like weaknesses of secularism. We talked about this with the pirates in California. Is that like this sort of visual pollution, right? If you have a secular society and then people start putting up crosses everywhere, you can't combat that with secular symbols. They just don't exist. So we have to be free from that. And this is a similar thing, right? Like opening with a prayer, you're imposing this on everybody and you're making it seem acceptable and normal and right, and you're bending the parliament to the will of religion.
hmm
Ugh.
Yeah,
Yeah, see,
yeah,
it gets me. Maybe it's like it's old man shouts at cloud type
yeah,
rage,
yeah.
right? Because we know younger atheists don't care about this.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, and I guess this particular prayer in Canada, they've been doing it. This one's been for a longer time. It's from 1877, I guess.
Wow. And it's always
Um,
been the same. They've never updated that.
yeah, I guess it's never been. Maybe it's been always the same. I mean, I guess they've changed. Well, there's a thing about they pray for the sovereign Queen Elizabeth, and so obviously that would have changed when there's a different monarch. But I think that's a good point. I mean, I think the interesting thing is that despite all of this in Canada, obviously it is very secular, and religion is not important in the way it is in the U.S., which has more established. I think like the separation of church and state maybe is a little bit stronger there. I mean, like at least in like a sort of a legal sense. And it just sort of struck me like I was just watching the leaders debate for the Conservative Party because well, there's no leader right now for the Conservative Party, so they're picking a new leader. And in the debate, I think there was six people on the stage. I don't think really anyone mentioned God at all, or like Christianity or religion or anything. And I mean, it's I mean quite interesting because obviously it would be totally different in the U.S. And so there is this kind of paradox where Canada has more kind of symbolic religious stuff in the Constitution and the national anthem, and yet whereas in the U.S. I don't think, aside from like having "In God We Trust" on the money and stuff like that.
Yeah, which was a
Um,
much later edition.
yeah, like that it wouldn't.
It just
Maybe it
doesn't
wouldn't. It
exist. There's
wouldn't.
none of
It
it.
wouldn't fly. I mean, so I think that is the kind of the paradox of like having this more like secular state. I don't know. I don't know if it's better to just to give like I don't know. I really
Well,
hate to say
let's put
like
you to the
yeah.
test in the lightning round, Nathan Alexander,
hmm hmm
where we've seen so many atheists before you just wilt and fall apart. Can a true atheist? They're simple yes no questions, but you can expand upon them. Nathan, can a true Canadian atheist tolerate these things? Having God in the preamble and a prayer before Parliament opens.
I think yes, you can tolerate it. I think because but I also think you can advocate for it to be removed. But I mean, I don't think like
Yeah.
uh, I don't think it would be to the extent where you need to declare war on the government or something because it's so against your values. Yeah.
Do you
Well,
think like is it okay just to tolerate this stuff as a Canadian?
I don't see like really an alternative. Like what would like with the prayer thing, there was an attempt to get it removed, but it failed. And the political parties know that it's not a huge issue for people. Like maybe if atheists or whatever were more mobilized and said like this is a deal breaker for us, we're not going to vote for your party unless you make this change. But I don't know if really it's that high of a priority. Yeah. Well, what do you think?
I don't want to tolerate it, but
Right. Yes.
It makes sense. And the trade-off to me is so much better. Because right now, like in the US, if the big thing in the news is the Roe v. Wade ruling.
Hmm.
It's not the final document and it's not what was going to be released to the public. But it's really weird to have someone going back in time 400 years or so to cite people who are basically making religious arguments
Yeah.
to
Right.
determine law over a law that was settled before most Americans were born. Like it's really strange that they're yeah, that feels worse when you have documents that do not have any historical connection or symbolic connection to religion, and they get used in these weird religious ways to impose religious, you know, minority views on people.
Yeah.
Yeah, having a religious symbol thrown in here and there, or a sop thrown to people. You know what? Here you go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We owe God all this other stuff, but really, this has got nothing to do with God. We're gonna live our life in the material realm here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That to me, that's a much better position. But the world that we want doesn't
Right.
have this
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. In a perfect world, there wouldn't be that sort of stuff. Yeah.
It gets easier to tolerate if it's not really imposing anything on you. And like you said, like you never knew that that was in there.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, probably like, we learned about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in school and stuff. And probably we read it and I probably didn't think anything of it.
Moving on, can a true Canadian atheist attend a Catholic school in Ontario for free?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are yeah, I think
Yeah.
you can. And I think, yeah, so like the Catholic schools are the one publicly funded one and people can attend them. Although, and I think like, I didn't go to a Catholic school, but you would recognize them because they wore uniforms,
Mm-hmm.
whereas like other public schools didn't. But I've heard like, people seem to have like the option of having a Catholic school. I don't know. Um, well, I think it's just because like there's a choice in like this school you can attend or whatever. Maybe they think the discipline is better there. I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I think there have been some worries about like not hiring teachers who are gay or whatever stuff like this, um,
Oh
which
yeah, yeah.
which would be illegal, but maybe they, stuff like this and like gay straight alliance stuff like that, which
So
um,
those schools are still able to discriminate along the religious lines as they teach.
yeah. So I think they can hire anyone to be a teacher, but I think they definitely would prefer Catholic teachers. That's my understanding. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a time where they teach religion, like a religion class or something. But
Yeah, yep, that sounds about right.
um, so yeah, I think you could, and a true atheist could attend this school in theory, but yeah,
Yeah, and I'm
maybe
sure
they,
plenty of atheists have. Catholic
yeah,
schools are
yeah,
infamous for that.
hmm yeah, yeah.
Can a true Canadian atheist sing the Canadian national anthem with pride?
I think so. Maybe people, someone in that article in the comments mentioned they always, when they're singing it, they always change the lyrics to
To
"We'll keep the
Gord.
land." Yeah,
Change it to Gord. Gord, keep our land
right.
glorious and free.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Oh, that's sweet. Okay, can a true Canadian atheist be an MP and not do the opening prayer?
I think what I would do is like, apparently you're supposed to stand during the reading of the
Hmm.
prayer. Maybe I would sit or turn my back to the to the speaker or something in protest.
Right. So
Yeah.
skip it. That
Yeah.
sounds great. Do you know if people do?
I'm not sure, but I know that like the Bloc Québécois, apparently, I think I'm not sure the order, but I know they sing the national anthem too at maybe each sitting, and I think like the Bloc Québécois doesn't enter until after the national anthem is.
Wow.
So, I
Man,
mean,
they're
I think
serious.
I read that I read that somewhere. I'm not 100% sure that's true, but it would make sense though. Um,
I
so
mean, like Sinn Fein in the UK, they don't even
right.
sit.
Yes, right, right. I mean, they're not. The block is not like that sort of extreme, but Yeah. I mean, I sort of, well, this is a tangent, but I mean, I sort of like them. I mean, yeah. They do introduce cool stuff, I guess, even though I disagree with them about Quebec being independent. But yeah. Yeah.
Spoken like a true Anglo. And finally, can a true Canadian atheist wish someone a Merry Christmas?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
All right, Nathan, I learned a lot today about Canada. That place is weird, and it
Mm,
keeps getting stranger.
hmm.
Anything else you'd like to plug? I know we've got the article down below. Check out the comments. Add more there.
Yeah.
We'd
Yeah.
love to hear from you there. And if not there, you can hit us up directly at Nath G Alexander at on the Twitters.
Hmm.
Do they use? Is it at Twitter? I don't
I
even
think it's
know. I don't even
at
know how it
Nath G
works.
Alexander.
At
Yeah.
Nath G Alexander. I
On
got it
Twitter.
backwards
Yeah.
on the Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so be sure to like and subscribe below. Big thanks to all our listeners and especially our Patreon supporters.
Yeah. To Lars, Debbie, and the AHS Plus blog.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank
Big ups,
you
you
so
guys.
much.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. And I think
Yep.
that's all for now, right?
I think so. Yeah.
See everyone later.